Does radiation hormesis really exist? Well, to start off with, we need to define what radiation hormesis is. And it comes down to the question of what is the effect of low levels of radiation on life? And this graphic up above comes from the literature, and I'll put a link to it in the comments. And let me explain what this graphic is. So in the ordinate axis right here is risk, radiation-induced risk. So if this goes up, that means risk is going up. And the abscissa, the x-axis, is radiation dose. So as dose gets higher, risk gets higher. And you can see here in this data up here, as the dose gets higher, the risk gets higher. So hormesis is a question is what happens here in these low dose ranges. And there are three scientific models that you get from the literature. The first one is hormesis, and that's this lower graph right here. Hormesis is that at some radiation dose, the risk goes down. In other words, it's healthy. And the scientific model for that would be something like exercise. If I had a 10 centimeter block and I were to jump off of that 100 times, that would be a great thing, right? That would be really healthy. That would be beneficial to me. But if I did it all at once, if I jumped off of a 10-meter block in one swoop, it's the same amount of work, the same amount of energy per mass being deposited in my body. If I do it all at once, it could be deadly, right? And so by having a protracted distribution of energy per mass, I can have something that's healthy versus if I make it acute, it becomes dangerous. And the scientific model for that you'll find in the literature goes back to evolution. If the first cells were around, say, 4 billion years ago, we know that radiation would have been a lot higher. And so the design specification would have been to have some elevated dose. And so what this is saying is that you're responding to what you're designed for, which is higher radiation levels. And there's a bunch of journal papers that you'll find in the literature that do talk about that. And this actually has been measured for rats. So if you give rats an elevated dose, it's pretty definitive that that does reduce their cancer probability if you give them an elevated dose. Now, the second model that's fairly popular is linear with the threshold. Linear with the threshold is this line right here, this dashed and dotted line right here. The idea is that you get no elevated radiation risk until you hit a threshold dose. So there's no effect until you hit a threshold dose, and then it linearly increases. And the scientific model for that is something like temperature. Over a given range of external temperatures, the body will regulate itself, and there's no effect. If you get too hot or too cold, then the body can't regulate itself, and you've overcome the body's ability to compensate. And this is just like an immune system response. The idea is that your body can handle a certain amount of radiation. The biosphere has always been radioactive, and so the body knows how to handle that. And within a certain range, the body will simply accommodate that, just like being exposed to fungi or viruses or bacteria. Below a threshold, it doesn't make any difference. Once you hit some threshold, then the risk increases with exposure. And then the linear no threshold hypothesis is this linear line. It basically goes through the zero, goes through the origin, and then linearly increases after that. And the scientific model for this is that it's really just double strand breaks. There's no epigenetics and there's no microbiome, or if it is, it's strictly linear, so that every increase in dose is going to give you a slight increase in risk. And there really isn't any evidence for that other than when we see up here, it does look like it's linear. But what we find is that down in this region, there's no evidence for any of those other than these scientific models claiming a certain mechanism that takes place. Let me show you the actual data that we have to put this in context. This is the actual measured data from the atomic bomb survivors. And right here, in this little range right here, is where all of those effects are taking place. So if you look up here, you can see it does increase with dose. This is the weighted colon dose. Your excess relative risk, it does increase with increasing dose. But down here in the range of 10 or 20 rem, which is about 4 or 5 times your regulatory limit for a radiation worker, what's happening down here? We don't know. And this is where hormesis is, or linear with threshold or linear no threshold. This is where the data is all in question. If you have a small dose, does that increase your risk? And maybe it gets better. Maybe it's linear. Maybe it's got a threshold. Maybe it's who knows what. The point is that natural variations are huge compared to any effects that we have down in this range of 10 or 20 rem. And keep in mind, 5 rem is the legal dose to a radiation worker. 100 millirem or 0.1 rem is the legal dose to a member of the public. And this is using System International gray. So 100 rem is 1 gray. So this would be 100 rem. This would be 50 rem, and then 10 rem is right in this range. And 10 rem is a huge dose radiologically. 0.01 down there, that's the public limit. So the point is that these doses just are too small to see compared to the noise that you have in the data. And this is what's terrifying people. People are terrified that there is some risk with some small dose, but it's too small to see. If it's there, it's just too small. The natural variations that you have are huge compared to any effect down here, if it's even there at all.